too.
So far, the United States has taken the idea of freedom of religion and confined it with secular law. This ideology was put forth by Chief Justice of California, Roger Traynor. He said that although freedom of consciousness and the freedom to believe are absolute, the freedom to act is not. Basically, one has liberty to practice religion as one sees fit, as long as it does not prevent another from exercising their basic human rights and civil liberties. Many of the founding fathers believed also in a strong separation of church and state. Thomas Jefferson borrowed his idea of thus building a wall of separation between church and state from the first founder of the Baptist Church in America, Roger Williams. He wanted a hedge or a wall of separation between the garden of the church and the wilderness of the world. A clear separation of church and state falls in line with the foundational belief that this country is of the people for the people. With so many different religions being practiced within the United States and various denominations under each, the idea of creating laws that unify the people becomes difficult. According to the Pew Research Center, 70% of the United States is Christian, with 25% evangelicals and about 21% being Catholic. 6% are non-Christian faiths, and 20% fall into the non-atheist agnostic category. Even with the majority of the country being Christian, the theological differences between the two biggest denominations are huge. Having religious freedom confined to secular law allows the government to take the middle ground. By only enforcing secular laws, the government positions itself as a fair arbiter. It is in the government's best interest to uphold this idea. It provides a framework for all religious sects and denominations to coexist within a society. However, it should only concern itself in making laws that can be applied to all of its citizens equally and to protect the individual's liberty to act within the confines of the law. Thomas Jefferson said, "Our civil rights have no dependence on our religious opinions any more than our opinions in physics or geometry." In its basic sense, he was right. The war against homosexuality was the realm of religious opinions until our understanding of the human body began to build enough evidence to establish a base of facts around the topic. In our current time, homosexuality has been legalized, but they have not acquired all their civil rights due to the battle against religious dogma. They are still fighting to receive the same benefits as heterosexual couples. Many religions in America still preach that homosexuality is a sin and is unnatural. Because the Commonwealth has decided to include homosexuals in the class of individuals protected by the Constitution, to an extent, religions do not have the power to deny civil rights to these individuals anymore. It has taken away the power of religious opinion and replaced it with the secular value that offers equal protection under the law. This is a clear example of how government plays this unbiased arbiter. It sees a citizen, a human being with individual rights it must protect from a set of ideas meant to delegitimize their personhood. In some conversations, people would argue that because the law doesn't necessarily prohibit an action, these individuals did have the liberty to be married and live their life the way they wanted. However, this argument is unfounded. They try to make the case that no one is stopping them from living their life the way they want. They could live together, they could walk out in the open without being stoned to death, and they could declare themselves in matrimony. The problem here is that heterosexual couples enjoy the protection of the law since it was the only form of marriage that was acknowledged. They enjoyed many spousal benefits from the government that homosexual couples were denied. The government protected the rights of one group while denying those of another group through silence or even stated law. The premise of these laws rested on religious opinions rooted in tradition. The government in this case oppressed a group of individuals based upon religious opinion and dogma. Is it even possible to write legislation that codifies a basic and common idea between all people in a commonwealth? I would argue yes, and would cite murder as being a prime example. Criminalizing murder can be a secular value that all citizens can agree to. If one was able to murder freely, then trust and cooperation within society would fall. The society would cease to exist since there wouldn't be enough safety to walk down the street and not fear being shot. In the interest of the individual and the collective, it makes logical sense to forbid murder within law. One does not need to hold a higher authority as to why murder should be forbidden. It is something that is counterproductive to living in society. If people were afraid to live in a society, what would be the point of that society? You would be better off living in the theorized state of nature. Theft is another basic idea that could be backed up by secular reasoning. We live in a society in which private property is protected. Upon this notion, we have built the entire mindset of capitalism. If we lived in a society that was more focused on providing to people based on their needs rather than their wants, we could have developed a sharing economy or one that doesn't put private property at the center. However, that's not reality. So, in the current system, criminalizing theft is something that a society could agree upon. It helps build trust in society, knowing that the things you work for or acquire will be protected without having to guard it constantly. If we all lived in a society in which theft wasn't criminalized, we would spend too much of our time worried about our current possessions and not investing that time somewhere else more beneficial. I'd also like to point out that there are very few things that have broken past the idea of privatization, human beings to an extent, and marriage. With the abolition of slavery, it was no longer okay to own other human beings as property. Through the breakdown in the concept of marriage, women have also gained this increased sense of not being property. We stopped seeing them as resources in both cases and worthy of having human dignity. By doing so, the state then expanded its protections equally to them. Also, I'm not saying that there isn't going to be exceptions to the above laws. Theft can be morally permissible in certain cases. If one was going to literally die from starvation and stole some food in order to stay alive, then many people would agree that theft would have been the right thing to do. Murder is a bit harder to make the case for since the definition of murder states unlawful killing. However, if self-defense wasn't lawful, and in some interpretations of Christianity it isn't, then generally speaking, most people would agree that murder would be an exception in that situation. Which is why it is important to have a fair and impartial judicial system to look at all these situations independently. This doesn't address state-sponsored murder or execution. I'm only speaking in terms of the individual. State-sponsored violence is a different subject altogether. Even if one's religion allowed the murder of others, I would still give authority to the Commonwealth on whether or not this should be allowed. The government must remain a neutral actor and only protect the religion's existence, but not all of its practices. In this instance, the government should forbid murder since it must apply this to all other citizens equally. It's funny having this conversation while living in America because the majority of the country falls into a Christian denomination. Many of them complain about Islam because of Sharia law. Sharia refers to the religious law or laws given through a religious text. Many of the countries that practice Sharia have it enshrined in their constitution as the ultimate law of the land. However, these same Christians want many Christian laws to be enacted in order to build a society reflective of their beliefs. Would this not be similar to Sharia? I am glad we have a constitution that puts the Supreme Court of the highest law of the land and not the Bible. But many Christians would beg to differ. How could they be against Sharia but not having their Bible in the same light? Well, hypocrisy, of course, but it's this my religion is better than yours type mentality. I'm following the correct God, so your idea is trash even though it's the same as mine. Christians try to enact laws based upon their beliefs all the time. What further complicates the situation is that some of our secular laws overlap with Christian ideas. These Christians then can't figure out why only some of their beliefs are laws and others are not. They don't get how we can find a secular reason to uphold some of their beliefs, but not all of them. I mean, what do the first 4 commandments have to do with non-believers? Nothing at all. This is why understanding the doctrine of religious restraint is so important for both believers and atheists. I did a video on it previously. You should check it out. It is in the best interest of society and religion to be constrained through secular law. It provides an even playing field for all ideas to come to the table and help advance our understanding. As Kant would say, laziness and cowardice are the reasons why such a large part of mankind gladly remain minors all their lives, long after nature has freed them from external guidance. They are the reasons why it is so easy for others to set themselves up as guardians. It is so comfortable to be a minor. If I have a book that thinks for me, a pastor who acts as my conscience, a physician who prescribes my diet, and so on, then I have no need to exert myself. I have no need to think, if only I can pay. Others will take care of that disagreeable business for me. Those guardians who have kindly taken supervision upon themselves see to it that the overwhelming majority of mankind, among them the entire fair sex, should consider the step to maturity not only as hard but as extremely dangerous. First, these guardians make their domestic cattle stupid and carefully prevent the docile creatures from taking a single step without leading strings to which they have fastened them. Then they show them the danger that would threaten them if they should try to walk by themselves. Now, this danger is not really that great. After stumbling a few times, they would at least learn to walk. However, examples of such failures intimidate and generally discourage all further attempts. And I say to end this, let's all learn to walk together.